hey everyone, and welcome to today's technical deep dive integrating Onfido's Web SDK into WebViews. I'm Marissa, Senior Staff Product Manager, and I'll be your host for the next 40-ish minutes, and I'm joined by our Director of Engineering, Radu, and Staff Software Engineer, Zoe. Let me tell you a little bit about our technical experts for today. So Radu has spent much of his career focused on technology innovation with both engineering management and technical leadership responsibilities. His primary focus is on innovation and productization of cloud services for big data processing and machine learning products for enterprise business scenarios. And we're also joined by Zoe, who's an experienced technical lead with a demonstrated history of working in the information technology and services industry. She's a strong professional skilled in front-end and agile methodologies. So Radu and Zoe, thanks very much for lending your expertise today. And with that, time to dive in. So over to you, Radu.
Thank you. Onfido Web SDK is used by our customers to connect Onfido directly to their end users for a smooth identity verification. It provides a set of screens and functionality with careful design to guide end users through the different photo or video capture processes. Most of our clients bootstrap the SDK with their configuration and embed it in their web application using a conventional web integration method, and then serve it to their customers via a browser. However, we do have a range of clients that are integrating the web solution also in their native applications, implemented for both iOS or Android devices. This brings us to our main theme for today, WebViews. We all use browsers like Chrome or Safari to navigate the web, but there's another player behind the scenes, which are these WebViews. These are built-in browsers that hide surprising abilities beyond just showing web pages in a mobile application. This demo dives into what WebViews are and why it's such an important part in the world of web and application development. Native applications are built specifically for a device operating system like iOS or Android for optimal performance. Native applications are written in languages such as Swift or Java for a deeper system integration. An application using WebViews is technically still a native application, but instead of a native code for each screen, they rely on a WebView to load web content that acts as the application interface. In fact, WebViews can power an entire application as they use the web technology to deliver the user experience within the native application container. So what makes this hybrid application so popular? Faster development. If you already have a responsive web application, turning it into a hybrid application for different devices becomes quite quick. Then you have ease of updates, because changes that you do to the web application are automatically available to all users because the content comes from the central location, which is your web server. With a native application, updates require separate builds for each platform and potentially App Store approval delays. And finally, you have deployment and updates convenience. You can combine all this with the power of native features, giving your web application extra capabilities while keeping the size of your application under control. These are just some examples of how WebViews can unlock such benefits and how they are making hybrid application a powerful development approach. And now I hand over to Zoe for more details.
Hi, everyone. Before we get into integrating Onfido Web SDK into WebView, let's cover two different topics here. The first one, WebViews. We have mentioned that WebViews and how they look like embedded browsers. But what does that actually mean? Imagine a browser in two parts. You get the visible parts with the controls, the address bar and the buttons. And then there is the rendering engine behind the scene, which renders the content and web pages. A web view is just the browser's rendering engine hidden in your app and displaying just the web content. So the section in most of the apps that you see that displays the web content is most likely that's a web view in disguise. And how does it actually work? Imagine your web view as an isolated component within your native app. It can fetch the content from remotely hosted locations. This is what lets you reuse your code between your web apps and your native app without kind of duplicating it. Normally in web browsers, the web content is isolated for security reasons. If the way it works is if a malicious code finds its way to your browser, it shouldn't crash your app or your system, it only crashes your browser. In WebViews, however, you can control exactly what contents are being loaded. So the chances that these malicious code find their way into your app is very low. There's also more into it. Unlike regular browsers, WebView content can talk to your native app and make use of the native features and APIs such as locations, cameras, contents, and so on. So developers have ways to implement these communications between your WebView and native app. This magic happens through something that we normally call the bridge, that sits on the native side that provides these communications. The second topic we want to talk about is permissions. For security and privacy reasons, whenever an app requires an access to any hardware as an input, such as camera or microphone, be it a native or a browser, it must request permission for this access. Without these permissions, you won't be able to enable the camera or microphone as an input stream. Desktop browsers have their permissions with a clear message in a pop-up at the time that the access is required. And then you as a developer can use this outcome of this permission to proceed to the next step or fall back to an alternative options. Whilst in the desktop browsers, we only ask the permissions at a precise moment that we need to access these APIs. In native browsers, you will have to declare these permissions early on. So when the user is installing the app, or in some cases when they're opening the app for the first time, they get alerted to grant the system level permissions for the app to access these hardware APIs. Onfido Web SDK uses devices such as camera, in some cases microphone, to capture photos and videos of documents and biometrics for identity verifications. While the SDK used in a browser permission, while SDK used in browsers while you're using the SDK, Web SDK in the browser, the permission pop-up kind of requests the access at the point that it's required. And you can either grant or allow access for these permissions. If any case this permission is blocked, we do kind of show some guide how to recover these permissions. The same rule, this is a normal kind of browser behavior, and the same rules kind of applies for when you're using WebView because it's the same rendering engine. However, you need to do a bit of more work to prepare your native apps to transfer these permissions from the native side to the WebView side. Okay, let's look at a minimum configuration you require to integrate the Web SDK into a native iOS and Android app. First one, iOS. In iOS development, the WebView component you use is called WK WebView. The web rendering engine behind this component is WebKit, which is, it may not be obvious in the first glance, but it's the same rendering engine that Safari and Chrome and iOS uses. In order to use the WebView component iOS, and in an iOS native app, you simply list the permissions you require inside your info peer list file, which I've created the example here that you can see a sample one of them, and just initiate the WebView bootstrapping the Onfido Web SDK, and the WebView component take care of everything else for you. This component is very efficient, almost behaves exactly the same as a desktop Safari, in a way that you do not need to do much to get the Web SDK working as long as you've handled the permissions in your PM for this. Next is Android. When it comes to Android, you will be using an extension of View class. WebView is using two different clients. They are WebView clients and Chrome clients. Android WebView does behave, even though it does behave the same way as the Chrome browser, but does not support many features and functionalities that normal Chrome browsers would do. So there's a little bit more work you need to be done. First, you will need to declare all the permissions, hardware permissions that you require in your manifest file upfront, using the right tag for cameras and microphones. And so this is just to acknowledge which APIs you will be requesting access later on. The second part is when you're setting up your WebView, you need to create that bridge to transfer this permission between the WebView and the native site. You will need to take care of all the runtime permissions, provide a way to override the permission request while accessing camera for WebViews. Permissions and unsupported APIs in the browsers are the two main reasons that may result in Onfido Web SDK failing to load in a WebView. Such errors may result in the Web SDK triggering an error callback to the integrator with the error type permission unavailable, which means that the SDK was unable to access or request necessary permissions. If you're after a reliable fallback option, you could, for the cases that the native cannot provide the permissions to access the hardware, the best way is to redirect the user out of the native and to the browser window. A hosted version of the Web SDK, or what we prefer is the smart capture link, Onfido smart capture links. The benefit of opening a browser window following loading errors are the permission will be requested directly from browsers, and Onfido flow will be executed in a standard browsers. In the right-hand side, this is the error that I've kind of explained to you that will be thrown at you if the permissions are not available. Okay, now I'm gonna attempt to do a live demo. Keep your fingers crossed that I'm not gonna crash or anything. So I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see my screen clearly?
Yeah, it looks great.
Cool, thank you. So here I've got my manifest file. We chose Android because Android is normally the most problematic one outside the other kind of platforms. iOS normally, as soon as you declare your permission, it works out of the box. And also the WebView is very clever to handles when there is no permission granted or blocked, so you can rely on it. Android is the most sensitive one. So here in my manifest file, I've declared the permissions that I've required for Onfido Web SDK. I've got camera and I've got audio and a couple more that kind of helped me to use auto capture. In my main activity, I've got this request permission is automatically triggered via WebView when the browser gets to the point, try to check for the availability for the cameras. And I have request permission here when I'm setting up the WebView. And then here when I'm declaring my web Chrome client for WebView. Now, if I connect with my Android, I'm gonna bring the Android screen here. Hopefully you can see that. And trying to build this app in my Android. So this is the first permission pop-up. As you see, this is the one that we have declared in the manifest file. So, and there will be two permission pop-ups because I have requested access for video and audio. I could explain why we need audio and video. You won't need both permissions in all Onfido flows, but because I'm using motion, face motion, and document capture, I'll have to give permissions for camera and audio. So I will give access for both of them. Okay. Okay, so we got this working. Cool. I didn't get the pop-up because Android remembers the permission and kind of on I gave permission last time. I will save the kind of awkward silence moment by not uninstalling and installing the app. So I'm just going to go through this session and do some. I don't have a card, so I'm just taking 2 photos of the passport I've got here. Okay. So that was me giving the right permissions and creating the bridge between the two. So what I'm gonna demonstrate is that on-error callback that I explained to you earlier. So again, what I'm gonna do first is I'm gonna uninstall this app. Okay, and what I will do is I will just remove these access permissions from the code and build again. So what I've done is I'm catching that error in my on-error functions, and I will throw just the error message here, which is no permission allowed. So this isn't a specific on-error callback by Onfido for the situations that the permissions are not available, either for camera or audio. Because I was using motion here, but for my face verification, I needed access for both audio and camera. If you are using selfie or video capture, you will only need to give permission for camera. And yeah, and you can then use redirect or whatever you want to do for your fallbacks. I now stop sharing the screen. Over to you, Marissa.
That was an awesome demo, Zoe. Thanks so much. So at Onfido, we pride ourselves in treating our customers like partners. And regardless of the integration method, our technical experts are ready to provide support at every step of the way. So during pre-sales, our solution engineers work with customers to consider options and identify the best integration strategy. Once the contract is signed, our implementation team provides hands-on support during integration, testing, troubleshooting, and post-launch monitoring and optimizations. After go live, our customer support engineers are available 24/7, and our software developers and PMs are brought in for tricky escalations. We've also put together a technical integration guide available in our developer hub, which covers most of the same topics that we've discussed today. So now that we're reaching the end of our main presentation content, we'd like to leave you with 3 key takeaways. So WebViews are a fast way to integrate, but they require a good understanding of the technology to make it work. Correct permissions handling is key to making WebViews work properly, and developers need to be sure that permissions can be requested across all flows and use cases. And third, especially if your team doesn't control the end-to-end experience for end users, we recommend implementing a fallback strategy to ensure optimal conversion rates. And now we're going to jump over to questions from the audience. So it looks like we have a first question. Zoe, Radu, are you ready? These are largely for you two. So the first question, my flow isn't working as expected. What's the best way to troubleshoot and identify the issue?
I think it highly depends what exactly is the unexpected part. Obviously, it can be as easy as what Zoe was demoing earlier, where, for example, an error is being thrown because permissions are missing and the like. That I think following the guidelines that Zoe just shared would be the right approach. If it would be something different than that, a manual test, a manual navigation through the flow is always the best start, because that will actually help you to understand exactly what is the right moment when something is being blocked. Is it before everything is starting? That potentially points to one of the problems that Zoe mentioned. Is it that things have started and then an issue is happening somewhere through the flow that could potentially indicate some other issues? So it highly depends ultimately on the nature of the problem. It's very hard to give a very specific answer to a generic question. Maybe Zoe, if you want to add anything else.
My suggestion is Onfido Web SDK is mainly primarily was created to work inside a web app as a kind of the name is on it, it's SDK. So if you're following our guidelines to integrate and make sure, there are so many guides and troubleshooting tips on our website to make sure it's working as you expected in the browser. Then you look at, when it comes to integrating with WebView, look at first thing, as we kind of keep repeating and repeating, is permissions. Make sure your permissions on a app level in your device setting is set. And then when it comes to the camera point, the pop-up appears, you have allowed permissions. If you've done all the stuff correctly, and if your flow is working as expected in the browser, you should be good to go.
And
For
if
this,
for whatever, sorry, Radu, I was going to say, and if for whatever reason it's not working as expected, well, then you'll probably find yourselves meeting with the three of us because we've helped many customers along the way with a variety of challenges. Are you ready for the next question?
For question number 2, around what else besides implementing the fallback?
I'm going to just read it out, Radu, before you
yes, please.
share the answer. So for folks who aren't keeping an eye on the chat, in addition to implementing a fallback flow, what are some other recommendations for considering WebViews? Okay, Radu, over to you.
Thank you. We have guided some of our customers, for example, to provide user guides and sample application and documentation to their customers, particularly if, for example, you will have customers of your own that take the integration, and basically in that sense, you start losing the control of, are permissions given or not? Is the implementation done in the right way? The best approach to try to avoid those kind of problems is to start upfronting some of this documentation to basically maximize the chances of success for your customers. Fallback, in principle, should be something that, just like the name says, should never be the case to be used, because if things are done in the right way, just like Zoe was mentioning, there is no reason why you would ever end up in a fallback situation. That still, if something goes wrong along the line, fallback is still the best option to tackle that situation, because given that all these permissions are things that are to be done in code, whether it's the application manifest or actually in the code to be passed, for example, in Android, then the end user has nothing under control if they are faced with such a blocker. So rather than having your end user just blocked in a screen that they cannot pass, it's still a good idea to just have this fallback just in case, again, something didn't go right. But hopefully with the right information, with the right documentation for your customers or for your developers, things should be implemented in the right way.
And a related follow-up question. So besides permissions, are there other pitfalls to look out for during the integration?
Do you want to take this one or should I? If you're integrating with WebViews, your main blocker is permissions, because as I explained earlier, the engine behind these WebViews are the browser engines, depending on which platform you are on. So if you have your permissions sorted and they are kind of, in the case of Android, they have the result of these permissions have been communicated to the WebView, so the WebView is aware of the permission being granted and it's accessible. It should be your first fallback. There is, depending on the which kind of how we normally recommend you use the CDN versions of the SDK to kind of integrate with, which will be your kind of smoothest way rather than installing it, because you're in a native environment. So when you're bootstrapping your SDK, try to inject the script using the CDN, and then you can also, with the latest version, you can pin the version you want, and then you can kind of pass your tokens and everything. There is at some older versions, which is not just a WebView kind of topic that you need to kind of look into if you are in a browser environment as well. If you're using our npm package, you will need to enable your CSPs for scripting, because we are loading some of our libraries from Onfido assets. So that would be the only other issues that we have kind of normally seen with different clients that had problem with. There is a documentation and guides regarding that on our integration guide for Web SDK as well. I hope that answers your question.
Fantastic. Then looks like we've come to the end of our Q&A. Thanks again, Radu and Zoe, for sharing your expertise, and big thanks to our audience for joining us today, or for folks watching back. It's been a pleasure to share some of our learnings with all of you, and we hope to see you in the future. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.